So Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Loved your presentation. How do you find Norway?
Well, I've primarily been in Oslo since I got here a few days ago, and I'm very happy with the fact that I got some time to go out exploring and walking and riding the metro and just sort of seeing daily life, and also connecting with a bunch of designers and creators here in Oslo. And I will say I'm incredibly impressed with the not just the digital creative economy, but the creative economy in general. To make any of this breathtaking digital media or new apps or campaigns and on, all the things that the people at this event do, you have to have musicians and painters and writers and poets and artists who form the kind of creative backbone, because that's what multimedia is. It's all those media put together. So I've had a chance to see some of that, and I've been incredibly impressed. This is a city that has 600,000 or 700,000 people in it. Now, I live in Brooklyn, New York, the city of Brooklyn, which was its own city for a long time before it became part of Manhattan, which is the epicenter of the creative part of New York. And it has probably 4 million people in Brooklyn, as opposed to 700,000 here in Oslo, and yet the creative economy here feels just every bit as vibrant as the one in Brooklyn. That's really saying something.
Well, I'm really happy to hear that. So in your talk, you talked a lot about human behavior and trends and things like that, and I represent the marketing part of all that. And I want to know if you have any thoughts on how, with all the things you know about this, would you build a relationship to your audience in 2014 as a brand? I mean, how would you communicate and build relationships?
Well, I think to understand what's different about communicating with what brands need to do differently today, you have to understand a little bit of what came before. So, and by before I mean like way at the beginning. So if you went to the grocery store in, say, 1875, 125 years ago, most of the goods that you bought at the grocery were all made within a few hundred miles of the store. So you'd walk into the store and a grocer would give you the goods from a wholesale quantity behind the shelf, behind the desk. And then when mass production and mass manufacturing and mass distribution took off in the 20th century, suddenly you could get things from very far away, from people you would never meet. And brands kind of stood in the distance. They stood in the gap between the people who made things and the people who used them. And that gap was, so you end up with, there's a guy named Kellogg somewhere making your cornflakes. There's a person or a personification of a promise that's made over a distance. And that was true for 100 years. And that's why brands were built with advertising. They were built with communications, because you had to speak over the distance. Well, digital media has changed that very fundamentally. Now, you can be in intimate conversation with a company all the time. So when you are separated by a large distance, often you have to shout to make your point. When you're really close with somebody, shouting sends people, running for the hills. So that's the last thing in the world you want to do. So brands have to become much more conversational. And really importantly, brands have become much more inspectable. That is to say, when the people making my cornflakes were 1,000 miles away, I could never go visit the factory. I could never see if their behavior matched their message. Now, because of the thousands and millions of little brothers who are all watching what's going on all the time, I know immediately when a company's actions and their message don't connect. So increasingly brands are behavioral. So they're intimate, conversational, and behavioral. It's about as much as what they do is what they say. And digital technology in particular has given them the ability to do much more. So there's a bigger expectation that comes on behalf of the consumers when brands are designed like that. And it's really easy to get it wrong. And one of the things that's a challenge for many big brands is they've developed very, very strongly developed muscles for communicating at a distance. They've honed them over a century. Now they very quickly have to develop the tools of communicating close in. And that is something people are scrambling to figure out. But that's where the game is.
Interesting. And would you say that technology is kind of in the way for a lot of big brands, the way they're built up right now? And do you think we need structural change within the big brands to be able to embrace this conversational marketing and the open sharing marketing?
Well, if I think I understand your question, it's about the role of technology and the whether or not it gets in the way sometimes. And I think the answer is that what we're in right now is an age of, when it comes to digital, is an age of fragmentation and therefore experimentation. When you have hundreds of thousands of apps, millions of apps, many of which do the same thing as each other, many of which have functionally the same kinds of promises that they make to the end consumer, that's just millions of places for brands to be. When we had a couple of television stations and we had a couple of newspapers, there were fewer places to actually deliver your message. Now it's not that we don't just have an abundance of places, we have a crisis of abundance. We have so many places that you can't put enough firepower behind any of them to actually create impact on their own. So what you see with companies is they're spending huge amounts of money on traditional media, but that budget has shrunk. And they're taking half of that budget and they're sprinkling it like pixie dust among a billion other little tiny jewels, because nobody knows what the next Twitter or Facebook, WhatsApp is going to be. No one's sure what platform is the one that is going to be the next one to dominate. So a chief marketing officer today needs to be much more experimental, much more risk-oriented than they were even just a few years ago, because there's a lot to pay attention, a lot more to pay attention to than there's ever been before, and there will be more tomorrow than there was yesterday.
Yeah, very interesting times we go to. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew.